another new edition of Windows and Current Affairs, and speaking before Al-Azhar and Al-Awqaf Ministry, President Al-Sisi on New Year's, of course the year 2015, have been giving a speech, and the Egyptian president, known to every Egyptian now as a vocal supporter for a renewed vision of Islam, has openly called for a renewal of the religious discourse here in Egypt. Why? Because Islam, or the the issue of misinterpreting Islam, the original rulings of Islam have posed great dangers for Islam, on top of all, posing Egyptian Muslims themselves as terrorists. Of course, we're going to get into many details why the whole world is seeing Islam as an element that could cause terrorism, chaos, and lots of dangers and lots of threats that could be directed to national security of countries, which is not true, of course. This is what we're going to discuss today in this edition of Windows and Current Affairs, and we're very delighted to have with us Dr. Ahmed Mohanna, the political analyst. Good evening, Dr.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
Same here. Among the things that President Sisi said in his speech before Al-Azhar and the Al-Awqaf Ministry is the corpus of Islam texts or rulings. Of course, there isn't a religious cleric or an Azhar scholar here present with us, but we are going to address the political background, the social background, a thorough look over changing the religious discourse in Egypt, and how important is it. He talked about the corpus of Islamic texts and ideas that we have neglected proofreading before, and that have misused and re-edited the rulings of that came in Quran and changed it and misinterpreted it and antagonized the whole world. It doesn't make any sense, he said in his words, that 1.6 billion people, which is the population of the Muslims, should want to kill the rest of the world, which are 7 billion, just because they want to live. Yeah. So this is a big problem.
I think President Sisi has a vision of what Islam should be, and he's got a clear understanding of moderate Islam, which Azhar promotes all the time. I think he also kind of touched on the extremism in terms of dealing with terrorists. I think what he referred to here is a misunderstanding of religious rulings, as you kindly mentioned, is also a deviation from the main course of Islam, spreading peace and security for the entire world, seeing that that is particularly coming from the threats opposed by Daesh or ISIS and the rest of these groups, Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhoods, etc. So I think he's working on the other 50%, to which we probably talked about before. The 50% of fighting terrorism is fighting people that carry a weapon with the same kind of weapon. But on the other side, the society itself needs to be reformed culturally, religiously, and socially in order to close the tap that always breeds terrorists, and that pool that always provides terrorist groups with individuals that can be attracted to continue terrorist attacks. And I think he's working on the society itself, and I think this is quite important in terms of reforming the understanding of what Islam is all about. Islam, as Prophet said, that he will be the advocate of non-Muslim if he's been harmed or hurt by a Muslim himself. So he spreads peace and security, and he lived with the Jews in Medina, he lived with Christians, so there isn't really any kind of rules that enforce Muslims or kind of makes Muslim hate the non-Muslims. And I think also President Sisi gave a great example in terms of attending the rituals of the Coptic during the Infinity. Here, definitely Azhar needs to have a major role in that, and Azhar has really been passive for quite some time, and that's the main cause behind the deviation from the main course of moderate Islam. So I think President Sisi now has acknowledged the fact that Azhar has to play a major role, because he's going to be against them in the Day of Judgment, as he expressed, that they are responsible for correcting the concept of Islam, not just internationally, but here on the ground level, but Egyptians and Arabs and Muslims overall critics cannot fight the rest of the world just for them they want to live by kind of forcing or spreading certain ideologies, taking half the truth. Islam ensures peace and security, and therefore terrorism by all means is forbidden by Islam. And we've seen the major statements, or the formal statements came out for others saying that they are against any threats whatsoever from any groups, whether inside Egypt or outside.
Right. The step taken by President to surprise the Coptic Orthodox Church, and while they were singing and doing the mass for the Nativity, celebrating the Nativity and Christmas, the Orthodox Christmas Day. Well, that is a very important step that was taken on the head of state's part, because not only it reflected modernization by the president and by his his own program as a president and his own thinking, unlike the Western media is trying to reflect, but also it has drawn a lesson of citizenship. To the whole world.
Civil society. I think he's building a new civil society.
How important to see that
vision. Absolutely, as a leader of this nation, elected by the majority, I think he's playing a major role in creating a new civil society with different vision, different understanding of what citizenship is all about. It's about brotherhood. It's about living in peace and harmony, irrespective of what religion we believe in or whatever ideologies we believe in. And I think the Christians and Muslims in Egypt have always been partners. We've seen that in 1919 revolution, we've seen that in 1952, we've seen that in 67, in 73, and in June 30th and before January 25th. So I think he was renewing the spirit of the Egyptians to maintain the civil society structure, maintain the citizenship, and maintain their loyalty to each other, whether they are Christians or Muslim. And we can also go back 1400 years when Prophet Muhammad said that Egypt will be opened for Muslims or for the Arabs, and he instructed Muslims to look after the Christians because they are basically the Arabs' uncles, because Hajar, the Prophet Ibrahim's wife, was Egyptian, so that was the first time. And the second time, Maria, the Copt, the Prophet Muhammad's wife, who gave him his baby Ibrahim, became the uncles of the Arab for the second time. So I think Prophet Muhammad basically instructed Muslims to look after the Coptic because they're very good people, they have faith, and they're also the closest to the Muslim in terms of faith. And Muslims and Christians throughout the history have really given great examples in terms of unity and solidarity in protecting Egypt and its nation. And I think the curse of the Muslim Brotherhood has also, despite the negativity or despite the problems, it actually renewed that solidarity and the unity between the Muslims and Christians, and it shall continue.
Of course it has done that, and more than that also. But let us go back to the speech, the important speech that was given by President Sisi at that particular day. He referred in particular to the religious clerics, which are part of the problem. Of course, when we talk about religious clerics, there are two issues related to those clerics. The first one is sometimes some of them are not accredited by Al-Azhar, and that's why their discourse becomes a lifetime bomb that could explode at any moment, that is also implanted in the minds of the youth. And the young people, and the people who are illiterate, and people who are in poor areas and in shanty towns and this. So how important is monitoring the religious clerics and regulate their discourse?
And I think as we discussed earlier, I think Azhar was a bit passive over the past 30-40 years, playing not negative role, but not really turning a blind eye over what's happening, and the clerics have misled in many occasions and in many places the youth by planting ideologies that are totally wrong and promoting violence. And we've seen in the 90s, which the former President Mubarak was fighting that by all force, what happened from jihadis, the Muslim Brotherhoods, and different forms of Al-Qaeda terrorist group. They were basically with matters of society by force, killing people, burning places. So I think here we've got a problem with an ideology that's been spreading in the absence of Al-Azhar. That's number two. Number one. I think the second one, in terms of the clerics, due to the large, we've got thousands of mosques, and the Azhar has no ability to control over these mosques, so they allowed non-accredited clerics to basically ascend the member and give speech. And a lot of these speeches sometimes...
There are lots of graduates from the Azhar University.
A lot of graduates, but they're not enough. And you can see now that Azhar started to look to include all the major mosques, but the small ones are not included in the actual plan.
Why doesn't that problem exist in churches, for example?
Because of the number of mosques. We've got thousands of mosques that exist throughout the country, and the clerics that are accredited are not enough, and therefore people basically allow others that they think, they're respectable people and they're very good, they ascend the member and give a speech. And with time it became basically the norm of life that anybody can ascend the member, and that's what we're having at the moment. A lot of ideologies, the members in the mosque have been used for elections, for example, for political ideologies, and we've seen that the Muslim Brotherhood have used these members quite a lot in promoting their violence. So I think it is still late, but it is a start to try to get the religious concept back on track, clean up all the misunderstanding of religion, fighting violence, and as we said earlier, it's not just about fighting terrorism with weapons, it's about fighting terrorism inside the civil society by clearing the wrong ideologies, educating youth, and taking care of education at all levels to ensure that kids are brought up on the right ideologies of moderate Islam that loves everybody, irrespective of their religion, and spread peace and security.
Right. The second issue that is related to the religious clerics, and according to Sisi's words, is that it's impossible, as we people, we hold the most prestigious and the most sacred cause in the whole world, which is Islam and its rulings. We could be the reason at the same time causing destruction and causing danger, anxiety, and a lot of fear to the rest of the world. And also tarnishing the image of this sublime religion.
Absolutely, because part of it we definitely responsible for, because we emptied Islam from its core of concepts. We started to practice Islam on just the front, but inside we're not actually following the right rulings of Islam. For example, Islam said you have to work, to be polite, and you have to show respect, but on our behaviors we're not actually reflecting that. We can see that the chaos that we have in the traffic, we have at work, we have in corruption. We are number 14 on the list of the world of the most corrupted nations. So if you actually take that and measure it on the rulings of Islam, how come this is what Islam is talking about? So the problem is us. The problem not only religious, it's most of the Islamic world is related and I want to also be fair that the misrepresentation of religion is not only on Islam, it's on all religions. We've seen the Jews.
Have also
absolutely, we've seen the Jews and the massacre they cause in Palestine, Judaism, bloodshed, yet they do it. So the problem here is that the media in the West actually kind of exploded. It blows the whole thing, and the problem is that we make it worse by actually creating misrepresentation in terms of our behaviors. So we're actually not doing Islam a favor, or not doing ourselves a favor. So if you look at the ideology spread by ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any of them, it actually confirms what any Western media would say about Islam, that it's a violent religion, etc. So unfortunately, we have people or groups in our society, Muslim society overall, around the world, that actually confirming what the Western media or some of the Western media are saying. actually not helping them.
So in other words, are you accusing those ignorant misinterpreters, religious clerics, that they claim that they come from an Islamic ideological background of feeding the greed of the media outlets to tarnish the image of Islam?
Absolutely. So if you look at the bloodshed that's caused and people that have been slaughtered by ISIS, for example, in Syria, and saying, you know, and a lot of rituals when they slaughter people. Now, in what kind of religion would you allow a human being to slaughter another human being? So we need to also confirm or acknowledge that human beings rely a lot on hearing. So we hear from the media that, you know, the Egyptian society is this and that, so we believe it. So we cannot expect everybody to read about Islam. So the problem is there's a lot of footage and a lot of behaviors that have been basically shown by our own people that are totally against Islam. And unfortunately, when it comes to the media and trying to basically explain it, becomes very difficult, because on one side you say that Islam is the religion of peace, that's coming actually from Islam, or salam, the peace be upon you. And on the other side, there's people slaughtering each other. If you look at the crisis now in Syria, people are fighting each other, Libya fighting each other. So, and unfortunately, the conspiracy of the fourth generation of war, which is destruction from within, that's being created by Western society, is actually feeding into the media as well, because it's showing that Muslims are fighting, Muslims and Christians are fighting inside one society. So unfortunately, what we need is an absolute reform of our religious and social ideologies to be able to represent Islam or Christianity, for that matter, in the right manner.
Right. The President also expressed a very important point that is related to that particular issue, which is setting ourselves free from the cocoon that we have trapped our mindsets in. How important is stepping outside the trap that we have trapped, where we have locked ourselves in for years and years, and being able to root out the problem from the source and trying to resolve it? So is it going to help? So it's not only a problem of religious clerics, but also a problem of awareness and culture.
Absolutely. We've seen during the marginalization of...
And we've seen it in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I want to say, because during the last 30, 40 years, the marginalization of people and undermining them, it actually makes them kind of accepting or passive towards any ideology or a message that gets given to them by the media. And now we have our brains full of messages, let's say mixed messages, about what is actually happening in the rest of the world. Are the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist groups, or are they religious? So we've got absolute confusion. And if you look at in terms of literacy, we've got 42% in Egypt that are illiterate. So these people don't read and write. Now you've got another 60% that God knows they're probably half educated. So,
but can I interfere here and I'll give you another question? Do you think the same thing is happening in India, for example?
Absolutely.
With that huge population and, of course, illiteracy also.
Absolutely. And we need to take that also, to be fair, during the occupation era, because the occupation era of England always was keen to destroy the culture and education in every country. And when we left Egypt in 1952, it was absolutely destroyed. So the same thing that is happening in India. We've got a high illiteracy rate. We've got a high rate that are victims of HIV, the victims of a lot of diseases, the victims of the social illness, if you like, the fighting, the misunderstanding, the violence against women, the violence against children, the child molestation. These are all behaviors that are left over by people that are totally marginalized and undermined. So I think what we need here, it's a fact that we're going to have to live with it. We need to rebuild the society, and rebuild the society through two directions from my point of view. The first direction is religious, because we are a religious society. And that's not from now, that's from Mehna, the governor of Egypt. So we cannot really say that we're going to live without atheists, without religion. We are a religious society. However, we need to build on a civil society or a civilization or a citizenship that is basically based on brotherhood and cooperation and living in harmony. Number two, we need to look at the education and looking at kids and how they get taught about religion and how they get taught about Christians and how they get taught about how they should treat the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians, and the respect here should be for him as a citizen and not for the religion that he actually believes in.
Exactly. This is what he hinted to or pointed out to in his term, and when he used the term the religious revolution.
Yes.
He talked about effecting a revolution in the religious discourse. So do you think that falls into the category of effecting the revolution when we try to effect a new curriculum for in schools, in changing the way the kids are aware awareness towards the other religions, maybe towards people who do not believe in any God at all, and they respect that at the same time? Because even adults, they could accuse someone who do not believe in God.
So I say
they do not respect his religious freedom.
The actual wording he used in terms of religious revolution, I think that was an extreme word. What we need is a revolution that we get over the concept that we misunderstood over a number of years, because there's people that don't believe in religion, so we cannot really force them. And Islam says that there is no kind of force over anyone to in a particular religion. So I think what he meant here, despite the fact that I still believe that the wording is too extreme, that he kind of referring to the fact that we need to relook at understanding of certain texts, of how we interpret them and how we apply them. But the fact here, in terms of religious revolution, you would have a Christian revolution in religion, you would have a Jewish revolution. So I think what I really prefer to say is a human being.
Too much?
I think it's too extreme.
I think
it's too hard. Because what we need is a change of our behaviors, a change of how we interpret things. Because we also need to be fair that people that misunderstand the religion, they're not bad, they just don't understand.
In other words, you're trying to say that we need to tone down.
Absolutely.
Not effect a revolution.
And that comes to absolutely, because revolution means, well, the word revolution means it's a split between an era and another one. So if you say that we're going to have a religious revolution, then we might be, let's say, Muslims turn Christians or vice versa. But when we say two, you can't put it here is just to try to understand the concepts a lot better, because the word revolution is a lot too much. And I think also psychologically we need to take into account that the Egyptians just came out of two revolutions. We don't want to have a religious revolution as well. And I think what we need to have before a religious revolution is have a reform of the administrative system that's full of corruption, that we needed to have a revolution there first.
So do you see that this speech that was given, or this call in particular by President al-Sisi to the Egyptians on that particular day, could be coming as the boldest effort yet to be done by a head of state and by us Egyptians to be trying to push the state and Egyptians, while they have the intention to be modernizers of Islam? His professional goal is very clear.
Yes.
He wants to purge the religion of the extremist ideas and the extremist thinking and the intolerance and violence that have fueled the groups like Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra and all the others.
The other side from people, other religions.
And also have motivated the attacks in Paris on the satirical newspaper. People who 12 were being killed.
That's right.
Were shot to death.
I think it's
martyrs. And they made heroes out of them.
Absolutely. And I think
that newspaper was very controversial and did not respect the freedom of religions, and it was biased and it was not objective. But with that act, barbaric act, they made heroes out of those.
Absolutely. I think the religious
very biased cartoonists.
Absolutely. The religious problem that we have with the misunderstanding of religious rulings, I think it's a wound that nobody wanted to touch for hundreds of years. And even everybody was just trying to touch softly, scared of any kind of fighting among the Muslims or Christians or the Muslim Sunnis and Shias. But I think it's a good thing that a head of state start to touch these rooms, because we have to face the fact that we've got a problem. We do have a problem, and we do have a problem that can basically split Egypt.
But Sisi came in office and he pointed out clearly and boldly that we have a problem with this.
Absolutely.
Even while he was promoting for himself, running for election.
Absolutely. And it's the first step, always a solution, is to touch on the problem and clearly explain it. And that's what we've been talking about, is the transparency. Tell me where the problem is, and I will help you as a head of state, as a nation, we will help you to solve it. So I think it's a good thing to start touching on these problems and confront society with these problems and tell them, because sometimes people are like ostrich. They escape to face realities, and we just keep, sweeping under the carpet, and in the end it just blows in our face. And we've seen that over the past 2 years with the terrorist attacks, because we've been unable to touch on social misunderstanding of religion, the core of the problems, absolutely, and it blew up. Do you
think President Sisi is doing that now?
I think he's trying to touch on these ones to open them up. It's going to be hurtful, it's going to be really hurting, but I think we need to open up and clean these rooms to clear up the sky and have a civil society that has no grievance against anybody.
But do you think this policy by President Sisi is going to be added to his burdens and worries?
Absolutely.
I mean, the worries that he has about
more effort on
more
himself.
Pressure on him.
Absolutely, and more
the
duties.
other side,
and more duties. To the Egyptians have to clear up the, and to the Western society, that he's trying now to sort out his own nation, so we don't participate, we or anybody else for that matter, participate in fueling the terrorist attacks or even the hatred among nations. But I think here we go back to the administrative system. We've got 6.5 million people. We are one of the most corrupted nations on earth, so you need to relook at reforming the administrative system. Even Al-Azhar that needs to be reformed, or even the church need to be reformed to help him, because he cannot always initiate projects and just leave it, because it's going to end up not completed. So we need an administrative system that has exactly the same vision. And that's what basically talking about in a strategic planning, is his vision has to filter down to all the administrative systems, so they're all talking exactly the same language. So even in his absence, or if he's busy with another project, somebody else can continue. So we need to move away the personalization of authority in the form of a Sisi to institutions that can help him. So I think if President Sisi is able to rebuild the Al-Azhar, which is one of the greatest Islamic institutions, I think it's going to help him a lot in clearing the misunderstanding of religion, and with graduates that are accredited, kind of cultured and educated well, I think in no time we'll be able to clear that, and Islam comes back to its rank as the most peaceful religion on earth.
Right. Also, speaking about the timing, because one might ask, or analysts might ask, is this the right time that such an initiative could be taken by head of state, which is facing maybe economic crisis after 2 revolutions and lots of other problems, and problems in issues concerned with foreign relations. However, President Sisi has taken a leap on that particular element. But also, other political analysts would say that Sisi, Al-Sisi as an Egyptian president who takes over after 2 very bad regimes, corrupted regimes, the dictatorship of Hosni Mubarak, who created somehow this saga of the militants and everything, and the terrorist brotherhood regime. So he comes as a truly pious head of state, who could be a moderate, Islamist moderate, who is, applying the pious doctrines of Islam, and is looking forward honestly to be able to
solving the problem. If you look at Mubarak, for example, he treated the terrorist groups.
Which opinion are you with?
I'm with the Sisi, and I'll tell you why. Because he's got some differences, but something he's doing different to Mubarak. Mubarak, when he treated terrorism, he treated it with force. So it created some kind of a conflict.
Sympathize with it.
Absolutely, that's number one. you're not actually fixing up the mentality of those terrorists, because 10, 15, 20, 25 years they're going to come out of prison. And when they came out of prison after January 25th, that's what we've seen. Because these people are mentally and ideologically and conceptually, they're totally destroyed. Because they've got no idea, they've got hatred, or they hate the state, they want revenge. What President Sisi is doing now is dealing with the conceptual side or the social side. In other words, people that carry weapon will deal with you with weapon if you carry weapon. But on the other side, if you want to understand what religion is all about, we will help you and we will give you a hand and we will live in peace. So I think he's taken the two approaches. Going back to your question, you're absolutely quite right that he's facing a heavy burden that he really inherited from Mubarak and made it worse by Morsi afterwards. Economic problems, social problems. We've got an international relation that is totally almost destroyed. But I think in working on his own society, I think it is important to work in parallel on all problems, unfortunately, because if you cannot work on law and leave the citizen, it's not going to help, and if you work on a citizen, leave the law, it's not going to help. So you're going to have to work on parallel lines. It is quite heavy, it's going to take a long time, but I think when Egypt stands, it's going to stand out quite solid. It is quite important because the citizen is what makes a civilization. It's not the law, it's not the state. So if I can actually build a citizen, and I think what he's trying, that's my understanding about what he's doing, he's trying to rebuild an Egyptian citizen that is basically believing in a religion, absolutely, in a religion with correct concept. He culturally knows who he is. We are the Egyptians, the first civilization on earth. We forgot that. He's building now a society that respects each other, and respects each other means irrespective of religion, ideologies, citizenship, or ethnicity. And I think this is a difficult job, and Azhar needs to help him, and I think Azhar needs to be reformed to have that right vision to help not just President Sisi but anybody for that matter, because we need to look in the future at institutions that can have Egypt built for the 21st century, and Egypt becomes strong with its own institutions, not with its own persons.
Right. Al-Azhar, you've raised a very important issue, which is the issue of Al-Azhar. We're going to touch on it later in the program, but we need to dig further into that attack on the French newspaper. Now, Muslims are already being posed as demons, according to the Western world. Now, with this barbaric attack on the satirical newspaper, who have its journalists and writers and cartoonists already biased,
that's right.
and who already does not, or they do not respect the freedom of religions.
That's right.
And respects the ethical codes of journalism even.
Yes.
But now that barbaric attack have triggered a backlash against Muslims more than ever before. So what do you think is the outcome?
I think it's the weakness of the nation. If you look at the Western society, they have strong media. They can always convince whoever lives in the world with whatever they want. The fabricated attack of September 11 was totally moved to the Muslim society that the Arabs are terrorists, but it's actually an inside job. The same thing, they trying to always convince the Arabs of different ideologies, different ideas, and in the end we are unable to respond. If you look at June 30th, for example, the great revolution of the Egyptians against the fascists of the Islamic rulers, the actual media in the Arab world in general, and even in Egypt, failed to actually explain to the rest of the world, and it's not a complimentary. 9TV did its best, but to be absolutely honest, the 90% of channels failed to actually explain to the world that June 30th was actually a revolution. So that's the role of the media, and the Western society is very successful when it comes to the media. They know how to put the message across, and at what time and at what level. So what we need to do here is develop our own media to defend our own culture, society, and religions as well, to of the world. And basically, if you look at Western society, and I lived 20 years in the Western society, they know little about Islam. And I think it's our job to show them what Islam is all about in our own behaviors and in our own practice. But we cannot rely on Islam that is going to spread itself through just instructions and we actually not practice it. Because if they come to our society, find there's a havoc in traffic, there's a corruption on government, there's a corruption in education. So what Islam are you talking about? So actually we misrepresent it. So going back to your question, the fact that these negative ideas about the Muslims described as demons and Islam is a harsh and violent religion is actually caused by our own people. Yes, the Western society or the Western media is actually playing that, but we are playing into their own hands. We actually practicing what they're trying to prove.
Unfortunately, we only have 5 minutes left, so we need to invest it in a bunch of questions. Among them is the Al-Azhar role. But first, before delving into Al-Azhar, why do you think it's a problem in most of the world that the state, state religious institutions are most of the time burdened by stagnation and by heavy control of the authorities and the administration? So when will they set themselves free?
It's quite simple, and we've got two great examples that happen in Egypt and in Middle Ages in Europe. Religious rulings, because
and I'm not talking about Islam, I'm talking also about the church.
Exactly, that's why I'm going to talk about the Middle Ages, the church,
yes,
the church. The fact the religious rulings, because they're quite clear and they can be clear in wording, but they can actually misinterpret. So rulings that trade in religions, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, they can actually use it to get people under their control. And that's what actually happened during the era of the Muslim Brotherhood. In the Middle Ages, the church managed to actually get the Europe under their control and became very authoritarian style of leadership or control. And we can see that the revolution against the church in the Middle Ages basically was against the religious rule or against the religious society. Exactly the same thing that happened against the Muslim Brotherhood was against the religious society, because religion is a way of life, is not a constitution for governance. Religion was never a constitution of government, and if you Jesus and his ruling, he used the religion to get people to love each other. Prophet Muhammad did exactly the same thing. Prophet Muhammad did not build in Medina when he immigrated from Mecca to Medina. He didn't build an Islamic society. He lived with the Jews. So there is nothing called a religious society. There is nothing called the religious state. Religion is a state of life. It's a behavior and it's a style of life that's got nothing to do with politics or governance, to be accurate.
Right. The Sheikh of Al-Azhar has lately a campaign in schools all over, in public schools in particular, and universities, promoting the message that love of the nation is part of the faith.
Absolutely.
So it's very clear that the Al-Azhar is planning to introduce new Islamic culture into, and of course a new discourse into the minds of the youth.
Children.
In public school and in universities, and I underline universities
because they're exposed to the internet media and a lot of other stuff.
How do you see that step by Al-Azhar? Are they responding to Sisi's calls and understanding the message that he's trying to convey to Al-Azhar scholars? And
I'm quite happy with the message, but I'm also quite worried that it's happening after the message of President Sisi. So they already know that. They should clear up the mind of the kids and planting that it's a small seed at these kids level, 3 and 4, and make them love the country and love their own fellow citizens, irrespective of the religion. I think the Azhar now is starting to move, but it needs a bit of reform in terms of having that vision of building a society that is absolutely clear of any religious discrimination. If you like, it's a that is open for everyone. And we've all traveled to Europe and the States and everywhere, and we find these places for prayers at every airport, at every mall. So I'm not here taking the side of the Western side, but I actually see they're not fighting Islam on the ground level. Politics is something else. But I want to build a society that is able to deal with tourists when they come in respect, show them in our own practice and in behavior that we are a good nation, we are honest. And I think Prophet Muhammad has managed to change an entire world in 23 years, and I think we have the foundation of Islam in a couple of years. I think the Arabs and Muslims are going back to be ranked one of the most polite and peaceful nation on earth.
Like they were before, and I'm sure they will be able to pick up. But for decades, Al-Azhar, unfortunately, almost somehow lost credibility according to the many bumps that it has undergone, like the attempts to make it the mouthpiece for the state rather than an honest interpreter of religion. Of course, the scholars were under pressure. The different regimes,
focus,
especially by at the time of the Brotherhood regime, and even like Mubarak.
Like Mubarak actually marginalized it completely. He made it absolutely useless because it made it part of the political regime, and we've seen that in many rulings really that came out, whether they are correct Islamic or not, like the interest rate and stuff like that. But I think Azhar needs to take its leadership. It's an independent institution, just like the Vatican. Independent institution.
But that one has problems also.
I know, but what I'm saying here, it's responsible for managing the religious rulings, the Islamic rulings, managing the concepts and the rulings of Islam that people understand it, and also they send delegations everywhere in the world to explain Islam to the rest of the world. So if we are sending delegations all over the world, and we've got councils that belong to Al-Azhar in many countries, I think there are about 45 centers worldwide, yet in our own backyard we've got a problem. So here Azhar is starting to pick up, and I bless this stage, but I think we need to have more cooperation between Al-Azhar, the Ministry of Education, and parents at home to try to create an environment that enable kids to understand the right religious concepts and grow up in moderate Islam as we've always seen.
But do you think, this is, I guess this is going to be our final question, do you think it's going to be only on the burden or on the shoulders of Al-Azhar, or could it also be directed towards the Ministry of Education because of the cultural background and the education and everything, because when they are not aware enough or cultured enough, they tend to think in a different way.
Absolutely. In any strategy, to summarize it for the few seconds that are left, in any strategy we need a formulator and an implementer. Al-Azhar will be the formulator of the religious reform, and I don't want to call it religious revolution. It's just a conceptual reform of understanding.
Conceptual reform.
Yes, we need Al-Azhar to start with that. Tell me what's right and what's wrong, and then give that to the Ministry of Education. We've seen that when we were kids. We were studying religious Islam. We were studying about Christianity. I studied about Christianity. So here, and then deal with parents. This is the actual syllabus of your kids that you need to educate them in the next 18 years at least. And this is what the school needs to basically plant as seeds in the kids. And I think as a leadership of institution, not just in Egypt, but worldwide, leading 1.6 in the world, I think Al-Azhar has the credibility and the power to do that, but it needs to be believing in the vision that we're already having or starting to implement in the 21st century, and I'm sure one day we will be the peaceful nation that Prophet Muhammad has always promised.
On that very optimistic note, Dr. Ahmed Mohanna, the political analyst, I'd like to thank you very much for your valuable input to Windows and Trade Affairs, and to the viewer, thank you very much for joining us, and please join us again next week with another new edition. Until then, that's a goodbye.